Do many people remember their childhood deeply? Sometimes I remember glimpses. I can think of one example where I remember very specifically on my 5th birthday, I had a Winnie the Pooh birthday cake that had a Tigger toy on top. I remember keeping that toy for ages. There are happy memories, bad memories, and some that are just confusing. Sometimes I remember full events, other times I just remember snippets of experiences. The reason I started pondering this was because there was a specific memory that I wasn't sure was a memory until recently. The more I think about it, the more real it feels. It felt like a nightmare at first, and each time there were more things I felt like I was remembering. I want to try and explain this properly, so first, I have to go over a few things. When I was a kid, my family used to be big on family get togethers, especially around the holidays. Everyone loved to get together and prepare food and give out gifts. So generally, Christmas and Thanksgiving were big events. There was one holiday that seemed to outshine the others, though: Easter. My family was religious, Catholic, but not enough to consistently go to church. Despite this, Easter was a huge event, and my extended family had a tradition that was known as a matanza. Essentially, they dug a deep hole for cooking and they buried a pig carcass to cook over the whole day. I remember as a kid being excited for these get togethers, not only because we had delicious food, but I also got to see all my cousins. We had a pretty big family, so there were lots of other kids to hang out with and cause mischief. One tradition that the kids loved was filling hollowed out eggs with flour and confetti. Early in the day of the event, we would paint and color eggs to hide around the house for the Easter egg hunt. These eggs were used later to smash on people's heads and make a huge mess, but that was the point. No one was immune to getting slam dunked by a flour filled eggshell. The whole event took place on my aunt and uncle's property. Their house was located at the end of a long dirt road, sort of in the middle of nowhere. We lived in a desert, so there were a lot of large stretches of empty land dotted with trees. Their house lay right next to a more woody area, and there was an expanse of desert adjoining the property. One thing that always stuck out to me as a kid was that there was a line of bamboo trees that grew adjacent to their house. It just felt really out of place. I remember one year they decided to trim back all the bamboo to open up the area around the back of the house. Now, we as kids at these Easter parties would run around and wrestle, play tag, throw rocks at each other, and do other stupid stuff. That was just during the day. We did the same stupid stuff when the sun set, and it was just in the dark. I was a pretty skittish kid, so I spooked easily. I blame my family because they are superstitious about a lot of things: ghosts, demons, you name it. And my family probably has a story for it. Hell, my dad used to use the Ouija board for fun when I was growing up. I only say this because as a kid, I used to be afraid of a lot of this kind of stuff. So when everyone started daring each other to cross the dark side of the house where the bamboo grew, I was less than excited. The house had floodlights on each corner, but the side of the house where the bamboo had been was completely dark. Now, as kids, we probably ranged from 10 to 16, so everyone would take turns daring each other to run from one floodlight to the other. It was probably like a 30-yard distance from one point to the other, covered in complete darkness. I remember watching each person sprint this distance both ways like their heels were on fire. I felt nauseous with anticipation. When it got around to me, because it was assumed everyone would be making the run, I was obviously hesitant to run the spooky gauntlet. In my mind, I thought it would be simple. I was a pretty fast runner after all. Unfortunately, when the eldest of my cousins picked me to go next, he dared me to walk the distance. I didn't say anything. I was scared. In the typical childish fashion, all the other kids let out a big ooh. Now, obviously, I had to do it, or forever be branded as a scaredy cat and forever be shunned by the cool older cousin. Looking back on it, I was likely fighting back tears because of how scared I was. I reluctantly pushed my way to the front and stood at the foot of the dark, impenetrable shadow. I tried to prepare myself to walk through, but before I could mentally prepare, I was pushed forward. I clearly remember someone saying, "Hurry up." As soon as my body left the safety of the floodlight, It was like somebody draped a heavy sheet over me. The darkness felt oppressive and cold. I could feel the prickling needles of anxiety behind my ears. At first, I felt frozen in place. I couldn't stand it. I just wanted to turn around and run away, find my mom, dad, and go home. Instead, I took a step forward. Surely it wouldn't be that bad. One step at a time. The dirt was soft below my feet, broken up occasionally by sharp rocks. The bamboo on my right was so dense I couldn't make anything out on the other side. On my left, the wall of the house was blank, only interrupted by a window at the halfway point. Occasionally, I glanced to see the others whispering to each other and pointing at me. I could feel my shoulders tensing up. They were basically at my ears at this point. I had reached the window. I looked into it. I couldn't help myself. It was pitch black. It was so dark I couldn't even see a reflection in it. I couldn't describe why, but it definitely felt like someone was watching me from inside. But that could have been my imagination running wild. Now I was taking longer strides, trying to expedite the horrible journey. I was nearly there. My toes were nearly touching the end of the darkness. I looked back one more time. I wish I hadn't. I twisted my neck and saw there was nobody waiting back at the start for me. I could instantly feel the rush of fear crawl its way up my back as my stomach lurched. I instantly entered flight mode as I hurled myself toward the light. In my rush, I nearly landed face first in the dirt, barely catching myself as I hit the floor. I spun around in a hurry and looked back. They'd apparently ditched me, probably as a prank, something to scare me, and well, it worked. I remember being scared, but I didn't have to go back. I could just go around the house where everyone was hanging out. I decided I would try and run around the house and meet up with the others. When I crossed around the house, I could smell the familiar barbecue smells and hear the voices of family chatting around the yard. When I rounded the corner, though, I didn't see anyone. It was the strangest sensation. It was like everyone was just a room over. It was like hearing the voices from next door, but they seemed to echo from nowhere. I could only guess they went inside the house. I was still scared. My cousins still hadn't appeared to let me know how good their prank was. So surely everyone had gone inside to hang out. I reasoned that I should go inside as well. But when I entered the house, all the lights were on. I couldn't see anyone. I was acutely aware of how empty it felt inside. The inside of the house itself was very open, and since it was a ranch-style home, the house was only one floor. The living room was combined with the dining room, and it took up about half the house. Aside from the furniture, it was completely devoid of any family members. For some reason, though, I could still hear the faint voices coming from a far-off room I couldn't pinpoint. Now it felt like everyone was hiding from me, like everyone was secretly in on a joke that was discussed before I'd arrived. I couldn't understand why everyone would go to these lengths for a practical joke. I didn't want to go any further into the house. I stood in the dining room looking around, trying to find anyone peeking from around a corner. This is where I made a mistake I couldn't have known not to make. I said, "Hello?" As soon as the words left my lips, I could only feel terror. The voices from the far-off room immediately ceased. The silence was all-encompassing as I stood there in the dining room. It was like I had spoken too loud in a library and was waiting for someone to round a corner and hush me. The feeling I got, though, was not one of simple chiding. It was as if I disturbed a sacred silence, one that meant more than I could imagine. Fear worked its way up from my toes and into my legs like a serpent climbing a tree. Suddenly, the dark corners of the room felt darker. The inside lights were bright, but they only worked to accentuate every dark corner of the room. Everything was very still. Then, like my body was anticipating what would happen next, the shadowy corners of the room began to expand. Darkness washed across the walls and floors, silent. I froze as I watched black masses grow. I stumbled backwards after most of the living room was already eaten away by darkness. I slammed into the side door of the dining room that led outside. I remember frantically clawing for a doorknob as I watched the shadows begin to subsume a side wall closest to the exit. I managed to get the door open as I tumbled outside. I landed in the hard-packed dirt just outside. I turned to see that the shadows had already started to consume the lights inside, swallowing them into nothing. By the time I stood, the inside of the house was an empty void. When I stood, I realized that whatever was happening wasn't over yet. The darkness outside was far more oppressive. It wasn't even night anymore. It was like nothing existed outside the floodlights that lit the perimeter of the house. No desert, no trees, no anything. It's hard for me to comprehend what exactly I saw, but I know I could make out the silhouettes of people on the edges of the darkness. It was like they were waiting for me. I wanted to cry out for help, but the noise died in my throat as I remembered what happened when I said something last time. There were a lot of them. What scared me more was the fact that they seemed to resemble my family members. I could make out certain details here and there that resembled my cousins or my aunts and uncles. They stood there, waiting for something, right on the edge. One thing was clear to me. They were watching me. Silvery pupils followed my movements. And without warning, the darkness began advancing like a tide. I was on my feet in an instant. The thought had crossed my mind to leave the property, but there was nowhere to leave. The darkness beyond was absolute. Then I remembered how I ended up in this position. Maybe I could go back the way I came. I ran around the side of the house as the shadows absorbed the outer edges of the light emitted by the floodlights. The figures didn't seem to physically move at all, rather their shapes just advanced with the wave of shadow. I ran hard to get to the side of the house where the bamboo grew. I nearly had to shimmy against the wall as the darkness got too close for comfort. I stood before the shadow I crossed to get here. It didn't appear nearly as dark as the one descending on me. I remember hearing a voice, "Walk," as it creeped into my ears. It felt strange and familiar. I made a step forward. My skull shivered with anxious fear as my fingernails dug into my palms. I wanted to run so badly, but something deep in my gut told me that was a bad idea. I wanted to turn around and look back to make sure I wasn't being lost to the black behind me. I remember hearing, "Don't." The voice peeked over my fear once again to prevent me from looking back. I focused my eyes forward as each step felt agonizingly slow, and now saw that in front of me there was another shadow. This one, though, didn't scare me. This one didn't seem as dark as the others. It had a hand outstretched toward me. I was nearly to the end of the darkness. I reached out. I closed my eyes as I could see black touch the edges of my peripheral vision. There was a sudden sensation of falling, followed by a thud of my chest that knocked the air out of me. I opened my eyes again. I was on the floor, my body sinking into the soft soil below. I remember craning my neck up and looking back. I only saw the long unlit area on the side of the house. I found myself lying on the back on the side I started on. I felt a cold sensation as I looked toward my feet, one foot still bathed in the shadow. I pulled it back in a jolt. A prickly sensation echoed through my foot as I brought my knee to my chest. I sat breathing heavily as I could hear the noises of footsteps coming from around the corner in front of me. I remember hearing someone yell, "There he is!" I looked up and saw my cousins rounding the corner. Among them was my dad. He had a serious face on. He strode up to me and kneeled. He didn't immediately acknowledge me, instead telling the others to go back inside the house and help clean up. He had turned his head toward me, and the others dispersed, heading inside. He had asked me if I was all right, and I could only manage a weak yeah. He looked up, peering behind me. He didn't say anything, but he looked tired. His brow furrowed, like he was trying to find something there. When I looked at him, though, it was like I could see two of him. one that kneeled right in front of me. But then there was like a outline to him, a dark silhouette outline. I said nothing as he held me up. He told me I should be more careful. I only replied, okay. As we passed away from the side of the house, I couldn't help but look one more time into the shadows. A small, shadowy figure stood alone in the darkness. It was about my height and build. A hand came up and waved as I crossed around the corner behind my dad. The full memory only came back to me a few days ago. I feel like I'm seeing shadows again. The darkness is a little too dark.